Imagine for a moment that everything you have built throughout your life, your family, your wealth, your health, was taken from you in the blink of an eye. Everything you love the most, everything that gives you security, disappearing without any warning. This is the story of Job, a man who faced challenges so deep and painful that it would be impossible not to ask, how did he endure it? Today, we are going to learn about the journey of Job, a man who had everything and suddenly found himself with nothing except his faith in God. Job was known as the greatest man in the East, blessed with lands, flocks, servants, and a loving family. He lived in peace, with firm and unwavering faith, but in a moment everything changed. Suddenly calamities began to arrive, one blow after another. How would you react if everything you loved and valued were taken from you in such a cruel way? Job was not only tested in his material possessions, he faced the emotional devastation of losing all his children and the physical pain of a cruel disease that covered his body in sores. Even his wife and friends, who initially seemed supportive, questioned his faith and integrity. Job was alone in the midst of unimaginable suffering, and it is here that the true essence of this story is revealed. How can one maintain hope when the world around them falls apart? How can one continue to believe in something greater when circumstances seem to point to complete abandonment? If you have ever wondered why bad things happen to good people, or if you have faced the kind of pain that leaves you without answers, this story is for you, because Job's journey is not just about suffering. It is about strength, resilience, and finding a greater meaning, even in the worst moments of life. Job teaches us that there is a purpose in suffering, and that even when we do not understand God's ways, we can trust that He is present in every detail. So, if you're ready to be inspired by one of the most powerful stories of faith and resilience, give it a like right now and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any story that warms the heart and reminds us of what truly matters in life. Every episode brings a new lesson, and your presence here is what motivates us to continue. Now, let's dive into the incredible story of Job together and discover how, even amidst the greatest trials, he found the strength to say, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." In the vast deserts of Uz, where the sand seemed to stretch endlessly, lived a man admired by all. Job was an example to others. Righteous, upright, fearful of God, and always seeking to do good. He was a man of faith, but also a man with a generous heart, who cared for his family and helped those around him. Everything seemed perfect in his life, a true blessing. But while Job lived his days in peace, something was about to change in the heavens. In a place beyond our comprehension, an unusual dialogue took place. God, observing Job and recognizing his devotion, was proud of him. Job was someone who, despite all the riches and comforts he had, never forgot to thank God, to live righteously and faithfully. And it was precisely there that the story took a turn. Satan, full of distrust and doubt, approached God and questioned Job's intentions. He said that Job was only faithful because his life was comfortable. He believed that if Job lost everything, he would curse God at the first opportunity. Satan wanted to prove that Job's faith was fragile and self-serving, and God, trusting in the integrity of his servant, allowed him to be tested, but without taking his life. Thus began the most severe test of faith anyone could imagine. In a single day, messengers arrived at Job's house with terrible news. First, the Sabaeans came, who stole the oxen and donkeys and killed his servants. Job barely had time to process this loss when another messenger arrived, saying that fire from heaven had consumed all the sheep and their shepherds. Another tragedy and another loss. But that wasn't all. The camels were also taken by the Chaldeans, and more servants were killed. And then came the most devastating blow. A powerful wind blew over the house where his children were gathered, celebrating together. The house collapsed, and none of them survived. Job, a loving father who had devoted so much to his family, had his heart broken upon hearing that all his children had died at once, an unimaginable pain, a loss that would crush any person. Job tore his robes, a sign of deep sorrow, and shaved his head. He prostrated himself on the ground amidst the dust, and instead of cursing or questioning God, he worshipped. He said something that even today echoes as a testimony of unbreakable faith. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." What could cause someone who had just lost everything to react in this way? What was the secret to Job's strength? Even in the face of such devastating suffering, Job remained calm and faithful. But this would not be the only test he would face. In heaven, Satan once again wanted to go further. He wasn't satisfied. He wanted to touch Job's own body, convinced that this time Job would not endure. God allowed Job to be afflicted physically, but again, his life was to be spared. Then Job was covered in painful sores, from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. The pain was not only physical, but also emotional. Sitting in ashes, he scraped his sores with a shard of pottery, trying to find some relief. His wife, seeing his torment, could not understand his resilience. She encouraged him to curse God and end his suffering. But even in that desperate situation, Job responded firmly. "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" He did not allow despair to take away his faith. Imagine Job's loneliness, the weight of divine silence as he faced endless pain. But the story does not end here. Job still had more lessons to learn, and God's plan for him was greater than the suffering he was facing at that moment. His friends who had come to comfort him would end up bringing even more anguish and questions. Could Job, even in the midst of such pain and accusations, continue to believe in God's greater plan? Let's continue together, for this story still holds great lessons about the true essence of faith and resilience. If you're enjoying the story of Job, please like as a proof of faith. May God bless your life. As Job dealt with the physical and emotional pain of losing everything, 3 friends came to see him: Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They had heard about the tragedy and came intending to comfort Job. When they saw him from a distance, they could barely recognize him. So terrible were the sores covering his body. They were so moved by Job's pain that they wept, tore their robes, and threw dust on their heads, a sign of mourning and respect for the immense suffering they witnessed. For 7 days and 7 nights, Job's friends stayed by his side in silence, sharing his suffering. They said nothing because they saw how deep his pain was. This was a moment of true companionship, where silence spoke louder than any word. They were there, simply present. But after those 7 days, the pressure of Job's suffering became unbearable, and he finally broke the silence. Job expressed his pain in anguished words. He cursed the day he was born, wishing he had never come into the world to face such suffering. He questioned why someone suffering so much should continue to live, why light still shines for those who know only bitterness. Job's lament was not rebellion against God, but a human cry from someone who was at the limit of their strength. It was then that his friends began to speak, trying to find answers for all of Job's suffering. But instead of comfort, their words brought more pain. Eliphaz, the first to speak, suggested that Job's suffering could only be the result of some hidden sin. He believed that God was just, and therefore Job must have done something wrong to deserve all this. To Eliphaz, no innocent person would suffer so much, and thus began a long series of debates between Job and his friends. Bildad and Zophar followed the same line of reasoning. They insisted that Job should repent, that he needed to humble himself before God and ask for forgiveness. Job, however, knew that he had done nothing to justify such calamities. He defended his innocence, but at the same time began to question why God was silent. Where was God in the midst of all this suffering? Why did the righteous seem to suffer while the wicked prospered? These were deep questions that Job asked with sincerity and pain. The tension between Job and his friends only increased, and the answers his friends gave brought no comfort. In fact, each word seemed to sink Job further into pain and doubt. Job felt misunderstood. Not only had he lost everything, but now he had to deal with accusations that somehow he was to blame for all of this. His soul was crushed under the weight of suffering and his friends' judgment. Job cried out for answers, but God's silence seemed endless. He wanted to understand the purpose of so much suffering. He wanted an encounter with God. He wanted to hear his voice, to know the reason behind it all. Job did not deny God's justice, but he wanted to understand the divine ways. He wanted an explanation for his seemingly causeless suffering. In a moment of complete anguish, Job declared, "Oh, that my words were recorded, that they were written on a scroll, that they were inscribed with an iron tool on lead, or engraved in rock forever." Job wanted his pain, his story, to be remembered, perhaps as a testimony for those who came after him. And even in the midst of so much doubt, he declared something that is one of the most powerful statements in the Bible. "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth." Even without understanding, Job held on to the hope that God was present, and that, in the end, he would reveal himself. But what Job didn't know was that soon he would have the encounter he so desired. God would not remain silent forever. At the right time, the Creator would speak to Job in such a powerful way that everything would change. Job was about to understand that, even in the darkest moments, God is in control, and there is a purpose for everything, even when we cannot see it. Get ready, because God's response to Job is something that transcends human understanding and shows us how vast and deep the power and wisdom of the Almighty are. Job's journey was far from over, and his greatest lessons were yet to come. What would you do if you lost your entire family today? Would you still remain faithful to God? Do you think you could endure it? Tell me in the comments. And then, when everything seemed lost, when Job's questions echoed without answer, God finally broke the silence. Out of a whirlwind, the Lord spoke directly to Job. Imagine the scene: the sky darkening, the wind blowing fiercely, and from within the storm, the powerful voice of God. But instead of giving direct explanations for Job's suffering, God began to ask questions. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" God asked Job. "Tell me if you understand." He continued, leading Job to reflect on the power of creation, the vastness of the universe, and the infinite divine wisdom. God questioned him about the depths of the sea, the origin of light and darkness, the constellations, and the mysteries that govern the cosmos. Each question from God was not an accusation, but an invitation for Job to understand that the ways of the Lord are far greater than the human mind can comprehend. Confronted with the immensity of God's power, Job realized something profound. He had spoken of what he did not understand, about things too wonderful for his comprehension. Job then repented of his words and acknowledged God's sovereignty. He did not receive a direct answer to his suffering, but he understood that God was in control of all things, even when it didn't make sense to him. The encounter with God changed Job's perspective, and he saw that despite all the suffering, trust in God was still the answer. After this encounter, God also turned to Job's friends and rebuked them for speaking wrongly about him. They had judged Job and God himself wrongly, believing that suffering could only be punishment. God commanded them to offer sacrifices and for Job to pray for them, showing the importance of forgiveness and mercy, even for those who hurt us during our most vulnerable moments. After all this, something extraordinary happened. God restored Job's fortunes. Everything he had lost was restored twofold: his wealth, his flocks, and he had, again, 7 sons and 3 daughters, who were considered the most beautiful in all the land. Job lived 140 more years, seeing his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even the 4th generation dying old and full of days. Job's story ended not only with restoration, but with a profound spiritual transformation, a testimony of faith that survived the greatest of storms. Job left us with a lesson that echoes across generations. Even when we do not understand the reason for difficulties, even when suffering seems unbearable, faith in God can sustain us. There are mysteries in life that are beyond our understanding, but God's love and sovereignty are always present, guiding our paths, even in the midst of storms. And so, we come to the end of Job's incredible story, a story that shows us the importance of trusting, even when everything seems lost, and remembering that God is in control, even when we do not see the way out. If this story touched your heart, if you learned something new, or simply felt inspired by Job's journey, give it a like and share this video with those you love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you won't miss any of our animated Bible stories. full of deep and inspiring lessons. Your presence here makes all the difference, and together we can continue spreading these messages of faith, hope, and love. I'm leaving 2 very special videos for you. One talks about the day Jesus was tempted in the desert by Satan, and the other tells how the 10 Commandments of the Bible came to be. I am sure you will like them. Go check them out. Until the next video, may God bless you and keep you always.